Good morning. This morning, Barbara Samora and I wanted to give you a brief overview of wetlands management within national parks in the Pacific Northwest and how we're adapting our management to climate change. The National Park Service was established in 1916 to preserve and protect special places for the American public. Our management in the face of climate change is as much a response as reflects our mission and goals as much as it does our fiscal or financial resources. And this is true for all the land management agencies. Specifically, with respect to the National Park Service, the Organic Act of 1916 states that we are to manage and protect our resources in such a manner as to maintain them unimpaired for the use and enjoyment of future generations. In addition, our National Park Service management policies, which were published in 2006, state that we should protect all components of these ecosystems, and we should focus on ecosystem processes and function, naturally evolving levels of biodiversity, and focus on the whole ecosystem, not single species management. In addition, they acknowledge that natural change is an integral part of functioning ecosystems. With respect to wetlands, it specifically states that we will protect wetlands, and our goal will be no net loss and even an increase on wetlands. So you've heard me use the word natural quite a bit, and that's throughout the NPS management policies. And natural conditions in there are also defined as the condition that resources would occur in the absence of human dominance on the landscape. But all day yesterday and today, we've been hearing about climate change, and we certainly acknowledge that it's pervasive, it's severe, and it's human domination over the landscape. So it makes our job a lot harder when we're trying to figure out what are our targets, what are our desired future conditions, how do we figure out metrics to know if these landscapes that we're supposed to be protecting unimpaired are actually unimpaired. But I'm not going to answer that question. I am going to just tell you what we are doing now. The National Park Service, as well as BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service, and U.S. Forest Service, all have climate change response strategies and action plans, which are very similar. The National Park Service has 4 key elements: science, adaptation, mitigation, and communication. In addition to these strategies and action plans, in the Pacific Northwest, national parks and national forests have been developing adaptation strategies. And I would say we're primarily doing this under the leadership and mentorship of Dr. Dave Peterson from the Forest Service. In 2008, Dave and Jessica Holofsky coordinated the Olympic Case Study Project on the Olympic Peninsula using Olympic National Park and National Forest. And in 2009, Dave, Crystal Raymond, and I organized the North Cascadia Adaptation Partnership, or NCAP. The NCAP report is going to be published on September 17th, and I've listed the website here, but I don't have a cover shot of it. In both of these projects, we used the same process. We worked in 4 broad areas: fish, wildlife, vegetation, and access, and we identified climate sensitivities, we did a vulnerability assessment, and then developed adaptation strategies and tactics. And wetlands and amphibians were large components of each project. So to give you an idea of the way we phrased the adaptation strategies that we developed in these 2 projects, we first identified climate change sensitivities, then we identified climate change strategies, and finally tactics. So on this slide, I'm just using one example, which was the climate change sensitivity of amphibians to climate change, which would cause reduced embryonic and larval survival. Our strategy was to increase population resilience and resistance, and some of the tactics that we identified ranged from reducing non-climatic threats, could be roads, could be some other development, removing exotic fish, all the way up to relocating species or assisted migration. And in these workshops, we tried not to limit ourselves to what we knew we might implement, because we wanted a robust strategy and tactics that could work across a large landscape. I think I forgot to mention that on the NCAP project, this was focused on 6 million acres. So it was Mount Rainier National Park, North Cascades National Park Complex, Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Park, National Forest, so I guess taking over the forest, Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest, spanning the east and west sides of the Cascades. So in addition to NCAP and the Olympic project and the wetland workshop that Amanda mentioned, we've now gone on to try to implement some of the strategies that we identified. One is restoring resilience of wetlands across our landscape. And both Mount Rainier and North Cascades have experimented with the efficacy of methods to remove fish within mountain lakes. Mount Rainier, or I should say North Cascades right now has a fairly large program removing fish, and the crew is out this week removing fish from Kettling Lake in the southeast portion of the park. We also try to remove exotic plants because they also interfere with ecosystem integrity. This is a picture of Ross Lake at North Cascades National Park, and it's reed canary grass, a fairly large infestation that actually isn't there anymore. But in this project, we are working with BC Parks because the reed canary grass begins up in British Columbia, since North Cascades National Park is on the boundary goes up to the border of Canada, then US, and extends the reed canary grass then extends 25 miles down Ross Lake. We also are doing things mitigating effects of development. Now, both of these two tactics that I've mentioned, removing exotics and protecting road edges, we realize these aren't climate adaptation strategies. They're just good ecosystem management, but they are compatible with climate adaptation. These pictures illustrate projects going on in Mount Rainier National Park along the Paradise Valley Road, where in the lower right-hand corner you can see tailed frogs that hibernate in the road ditches under rocks during the winter. So Barbara works with road crew to make sure that when they're plowing during spring or early summer snow removal, the plows stay on the asphalt surface and don't go into the road ditches until the frogs have metamorphosed. We also are working on expanding our science base, and this was something that was listed in both the NCAP and Olympic project as a need. And the speakers before me also mentioned this, that we don't have enough detailed information. So the National Park Service does have a long-term monitoring program, and one of our vital signs is mountain lakes. And this vital sign is implemented in Mount Rainier, North Cascades, and Olympic National Parks. And it is fairly small in that we are only able to afford to monitor 20 lakes on an annual basis, although both North Cascades and Mount Rainier do supplement this with other funding, and I'm not quite sure about Olympic, but we have received funding in North Cascades to do a number of lakes on a 5-year rotating basis. At all the lakes, we monitor biotic, chemical, and physical parameters, and we conduct amphibian surveys, not just in the lake, but in the surrounding wetlands. We also expand our science base through citizen science programs. This slide shows a program that's been ongoing at Mount Rainier for 6 years in monitoring western toads, where citizen science crews go to 13 or 14 western toad breeding sites periodically through the summer, monitoring the development of the toads. We also are using citizen science to monitor mercury bioaccumulation through dragonfly surveys in North Cascades and Mount Rainier. And chytrid fungus surveys are really done in collaboration with other researchers and park crews. But the citizen science aspect is really important to us because it not only allows us to do more extensive monitoring, but it helps us communicate to the public about our resources, the impacts of climate change, and get their input on future adaptation strategies. Of course, a large part of our expanding science base is partnering with outside researchers. And I think this project is probably one of our best projects focused on climate change. Maureen assembled a great team and worked with us the managers and applied biologists, because I don't really know if I'm a manager because I don't know that I have control over anything, but we've been part of the project from the very beginning. So we've gone back and forth articulating what we would like to know, and that's as much a collaboration between the agency-based biologists and the research scientists on what could we ask, how would it help in refining those questions. Also ongoing in the National Park Service is a re-examination of NPS policies. Our policies are, I think they're very flexible. You know, even in the Park Service, where we like to say we're hands-off, we do manage, we do manipulate, we do restoration. In the case of endangered species, we reintroduce or move populations around. But thinking of climate change, it's so severe. It's not like an extensive, it's not working on one site. It's throughout a park, across 1 million acres. And in that case, resource managers and biologists are finding that we think we need more guidance. When do we implement these strategies? How far do we really want to go? So recently, the climate science, the Washington Office of the Climate Change Division of the Park Service asked all parks to submit, they call them gnarly issues. What are decisions you're facing? The Park Service policies don't give you adequate guidance on how you should respond. So, of course, in the field, we're waiting to see what comes out of that. Another re-examination of policies was the Leopold Report. So in 1963, Starker Leopold and a group of scientists did a report that was that's referred to as the Leopold Report, but its official name was Wildlife Management in the National Parks. And this was a report given to the Secretary of the Interior, Stuart Udall, and in it they addressed how we should manage wildlife. And one of the terms that they really promoted was that the Park Service should maintain primitive vignettes of American history. And or American landscapes, even though this was just wildlife, it was applied more widely. And it seems to often get into a static point of time. So in 2012, Director John Jarvis appointed a group of scientists to re-examine this Leopold Report in light of environmental change that's widespread and severe, and the fact that ecosystem science had advanced quite a bit over the last 50 years. So the Leopold Commission, what they really recommended was that the overarching goal of the National Park Service should be to manage for continuous change. They went on to say that we really need to expand our science. We need to have more research, more monitoring, and use this to better protect the ecological integrity of these resources. So what would we like to do? We really would like to increase the resolution of the data that we have to enable application to park management. This has been mentioned in a few other talks, but we also realize that we really need to increase targeted climate science information by doing a better job of identifying and articulating what our management questions are. And Gustavo mentioned that this morning, that's what we really, as applied scientists, need to do. But I would say we really need to do it as a partnership, and that's why this particular project we're working on is so successful. We'd like to be able to improve wetland delineation. North Cascades, it's a big issue. We don't have LIDAR, so we are definitely a challenge for Megan. We'd like to be able to use this data then to identify refugia and vulnerable habitats so we can then adapt our management in these areas. And we'd like to be able to detect changes and attribute causes of change. And that means expanding our monitoring, both frequency and spatial extent, and also on wetlands. I'm a plant ecologist, so I'll say, all we're doing is watching water and amphibians, nothing about plants. We don't even know which rare plants are in any plants are in these wetlands. And finally, just to bring it back to what Seyoun had used, thinking about the output of these models. This is a really simplified map of North Cascades National Park, and the 8 black dots on it are the lakes where we've been removing fish. And what we'd like to do is now re-examine this fish management plan and other actions that we're doing in the face of climate change. The Mountain Lakes Fisheries Management Plan was a really large effort for us over a number of years, using a lot of great research on amphibians, fish, and I'll say amphibians and fish, but not climate change. So now that we have this input, we can re-examine the lakes that we've selected for fish removal and say, would we alter things? We might not, but we might. And so this map is just like the one Seyoun showed you, but with Mount Rainier. And I don't know if you can see very well on this, and I don't really know if I could use a pointer, but this white line is the outline of North Cascades National Park. The little red dot, or the little dots, are all ponds and lakes. And so we have over 245 lakes and ponds, and the triangles are where there are fish. So if you think about where we're removing fish, this week, this is where the crew is, in a place that's not projected to change much. This is a change detection map. Seyoun showed you the historical with the dark blue where they're not going to dry out, and light blue where ponds are going to dry out. We've already removed fish here. This is in the change where this is a great deal of change, so used to never dry out, probably is going to dry out, and we've removed fish. And I don't know the answer, but this is what our group has discussed, that we want to get together with other biologists in the park and managers and say, how would we proceed and would we even change things? And finally, we know there's great urgency and we need to be acting soon, and that's basically what the Leopold report told us.